Any other questions? Sure.
I understand there were a lot of papers found not that many years ago down on the southern plantation.
I'm so glad you asked that question.
And
Yep.
I'm just interested if she did all that wealth of writing during the several years she was there, or was it a lot of work that she had taken with her as well?
Yep. I have 2 other talks that I give on her, I should say, so anybody who wants me to come back, I do a whole talk on just the letter books, and then I do a whole talk that's sort of her biographical talk. But I did bring these images with me. This is the mansion where the letter books were found in 1984. It is called Arlington. And these are 4 examples of covers of letter books. She started creating these when she was about 23 years old. This is a very determined, lifelong project that she knew she was going to do. She started at about the age of 23. She completed her last volume at the age of 67. So that is a massive amount of correspondence, or about 5,000 letters, which is why this, for me, is a multi-year project. In the beginning of the first letter book, just so that you know that she really was determined to do this, this is sort of an author's statement, and she says, I've committed to the flames all of the letters that she wrote as a girl, unfortunately, written before 1765. And then she says down at the end that she is commending these volumes of letters to affectionate posterity, meaning as a student of history, she knew the importance of writing down information, and also for her descendants, which she didn't have any direct descendants, unfortunately. I'll get into that. But ultimately, she left these behind for all of us to have this historical record. And I get chills every time I say that, but she really, really did. The other interesting thing she did is when she bought a blank volume to start creating a letter book, and all that simply means is that when she wrote to John Adams, she would then write a copy of that letter into her letter book. She left the first few pages blank. When the book was full, she would go back and create a table of contents. And you can see, this is from letter book 1, volume 1st, to my father, and the page on which that letter appears. She also numbered the letters, and in other letter books, in this table of contents, she would include who the letter was to, what number letter it was, and on what page it appeared. So she's very, very methodical. This is not a haphazard project at all. And so that's sort of what has driven me to get involved in these sorts of things. Does that answer your question? I mean, it was just, and I should also say, I was saying this to some of the ladies earlier, she's the only woman from the 18th century who we know of who did this. There are a number of reasons for that. Female literacy was not great, especially pre-Revolutionary War. And it costs money to purchase paper, ink, all of that. But most importantly, Jill Kerr Conway makes this point in a book that she wrote recently about women's biographies. Women in this period of time just did not think that their lives were worth recording. And we are so lucky that Judith did. And it was not out of a sense of ego. As I say, it was really out of a sense of understanding. She's a student of history. We're in the middle of the Revolutionary War. We've got John Murray coming. Universalist stuff is going on. She knew that it was a moment in time that she needed to document. And so as much as these letters are about the personal story and family news, they're also, they add color to the historical record. I mean, you learn about George Washington presiding over Congress in flowing gowns of purple satin. I never read that in a history book. So we got some really interesting and important stories, which is why it's just so important to transcribe and publish and index every letter so that David McCullough will use the work which he has, so that Cokie Roberts will use it, which he did in Founding Mothers, and it goes on and on. So important stuff. Yes, sir?
Could you comment on her literary style?
Dramatic. Those letters are tongue twisters. She was largely self-educated. Let's just start there. there was a family myth that's been perpetuated over the years that she was allowed to study with her brother Winthrop, who was tutored to prepare him for Harvard. I know from the letters that this was simply not true. Having said that, there was a family library. There was a culture of education in the house, in the Sargent family home. And they really did think of themselves as citizens of the world. I mean, Winthrop Sargent's ships are sailing to England and coming back with books, among other things. And so she really undertook a lifelong process of self-education, just by reading and discussing and sort of being around all of this. But she only was taught very, very basic reading and writing skills by a woman she called her ill-taught preceptress. And really, there are many letters in which she talks about the discrepancy between her education and her brother's. And that is really what drove her to change things for her own daughter, for her nieces, and for girls of the next generation. She also, I learned through the letters, they didn't know this before, but she helped found a female academy in Dorchester. The academy run by Mrs. Saunders and Miss Beach. Mrs. Saunders was, of course, a cousin. And they opened the academy in 1802, and by then, Judith had published The Gleaner. Everybody knew who she was. She was very famous. She was a strong public advocate for female education, and so they're not dumb. They said, could we use you to help us do this? And of course she did. So, yes, ma'am.
To what extent did she reconcile with her brothers after they disapproved of her marriage?
Oh, they got over it, as brothers do. Her brother Winthrop is just really kind of a pain. He just a very rigid, stern person, which is interesting because I have studied his years at Harvard, and he was a troublemaker at Harvard, and he got, a lot of trouble at Harvard. And then he really sort of turned the other direction and became a military officer. He was the secretary of the Ohio Company that opened up the Ohio Territory. He was the first governor of the Mississippi Territory. It was a very big deal. But you read accounts of him, and they're all about how impeccably dressed he was, and how stiff, and how formal. But she absolutely adored him. She defended John. She said, this is the man of my heart. They're very, very sweet letters. And she says, this is not about, do I have a choice in this? I don't have a choice in this. He is meant for me. I am meant for him. That's it. So you need to deal with it. But they didn't communicate for over a year. And it absolutely broke her heart. I am also convinced that that is one of the reasons why she never took on the issue of slavery in the way that a lot of us wish she had. She had a direct influence on the next generation that did. But her brother Winthrop, he's living in Mississippi, and he married a very, very wealthy woman, so he owned a lot of slaves. And I think that it was so heartbreaking to her to have gone through that what she did with John Murray when she married John Murray, that she just left it alone. She just loved her brother and didn't want to engage in anything else. So, and then the other two siblings came around. Winthrop was the one who they all sort of listened to.